Here's how Amish women sustained family during the Great Depression. Maintaining large kitchen gardens, Amish women tended extensive vegetable gardens to feed their families. They grew staples like potatoes, tomatoes, beans, and sweet corn, which significantly reduced the need to buy food. In Amish households, meat, dairy, poultry, and vegetables were rarely bought at stores because most were produced on the family farm. By canning and storing their garden harvest, Amish women ensured a steady food supply year-round despite the hard times. Raising poultry for eggs and meat, many Amish women managed poultry flocks, a traditionally female domain on the farm. Chickens provided daily eggs and occasional meat for the family, and surplus eggs could be sold for cash. In fact, poultry was noted as a predominantly female enterprise on Amish farms. Egg sales became a lifeline. One Amish family in Lancaster sold 7,200 dozen eggs in 1 year at 30 cents a dozen for about $2,160, making poultry the mainstay of the farm economy during the mid-1930s. Such income, earned through the wife's henhouse labor, often called egg money, helped pay for necessities when other farm revenues fell short. Dairy work and home milk processing. Farm wives and daughters helped with milking cows and processing dairy products each day. Lacking electric milking machines, Amish women milked by hand and still produced plenty of milk for home use and sale. In one surveyed Amish family, they drank milk at every meal and ate home-churned butter on homemade bread 3 times a day, all made possible by women's dairy work. Amish women also made cheeses and cottage butter for family use. Any surplus milk or cream was sold to local dairies, providing extra income and ensuring nothing went to waste. Helping with fieldwork and harvests. When needed, Amish women and older girls pitched in with field chores to make sure crops were planted and harvested on time. Typically, Amish men and boys handled plowing and heavy field labor, but women were not strangers to farm work beyond the garden. Daughters often worked alongside fathers during busy seasons, for example, cutting hay or gathering potatoes. In one case, an Amish farmer's teenage daughter Susie Zook was injured while working in the fields in spring 1935. An event noted in the Amish newspaper The Budget because her being unable to work affected the family economy. This anecdote shows that the extra labor of women in the fields was crucial. Their contribution could spell the difference in bringing in the harvest without hiring outside help. Home butchering and meat preservation. Amish families often butchered their own livestock, and women were heavily involved in processing and preserving the meat. Farm women rendered lard, salted down pork, canned beef, and made scrapple and sausage from butchering hogs or beef cows. By doing butchering at home, they avoided the cost of butcher services and maximized the food obtained from each animal. Amish women then preserved the meat by smoking hams, curing bacon, or pressure canning pieces, ensuring a supply of protein for months. Because of these efforts, Amish families rarely needed to purchase meat. Store-bought meat was a rarity since they produced and preserved their own. This self-sufficiency in meat kept families fed even when cash was scarce. Practicing diversified farming. Amish farms did not specialize in a single cash crop. Instead, they raised a variety of crops and animals. This diversified approach, corn, hay, wheat, potatoes, garden vegetables, dairy cows, chickens, etc., provided both food for the family and products to sell. It was noted that while other farmers were turning to monoculture, the old order Amish continued their tradition of general diversified farming while also feeding their families. Amish women's labor was integral to this system. They tended the garden and poultry for family food, while the men grew field crops and tended larger livestock. The variety on Amish farms meant that even if market prices for one product dropped, such as low corn prices during the Depression, the family still had other food and income sources to rely on. This strategy greatly increased their resilience. Sewing and mending clothing. Amish women sewed nearly all of their family's clothing at home, which saved money and ensured everyone had sturdy garments. Using treadle or foot-powered sewing machines or simple hand stitching, they made dresses, shirts, pants, aprons, and even hats. Women crafted all clothes by hand, recalls one account of Amish life. Cloth was often bought in bulk bolts, and old clothes were continually patched or cut down for younger children. This constant mending and making kept the family well clothed through the Depression without expensive store-bought clothes. Even when fabric was scarce, Amish mothers would take apart worn-out garments to reuse the fabric in quilts or children's clothes, exemplifying the thrift of make do or do without. Repurposing feed sacks into fabric. In the 1930s, thrifty rural housewives famously turned cotton feed and flour sacks into clothing, and Amish women were no exception. They saved the patterned cloth bags from animal feed or flour and transformed them into dresses, shirts, aprons, and curtains. These feed sack dresses became an iconic part of rural life from the 1920s through the Great Depression. Amish families who purchased livestock feed in bulk sacks accumulated this free fabric source. An Amish mother might piece together a girl's dress from 2 matching feed sacks, or make patchwork quilts and pillowcases from the colorful prints. By recycling packaging into textiles, Amish women provided for their families' needs at virtually no cost, a critical saving strategy during lean years, quilting for warmth and community. Quilting was both a creative outlet and a practical necessity that Amish women amplified during the Depression. They gathered every scrap of usable fabric from worn clothes and sewing remnants to make quilts, which provided warmth in unheated bedrooms during winter. Often, Amish women held quilting bees, gatherings where friends and relatives spent a day quilting together to officially finish a quilt while socializing. These group efforts meant a quilt could be completed in a fraction of the time, and it strengthened community bonds. The quilts themselves sustained families by keeping heating costs down, layers of quilts for insulation, and sometimes even bringing in income. A few Amish women sold spare quilts or quilted goods to outsiders or at local markets. Thus, the old saying, "When life gives you scraps, make a quilt," rang especially true in Amish homes, canning and preserving food. Amish farm wives were experts in food preservation, a skill that proved invaluable in the 1930s. Each summer and fall, they canned hundreds of quarts of vegetables, fruits, sauces, and meats in glass jars. They also dried foods like apples, corn, or beef, and fermented pickles and sauerkraut in crocks. This industrious preserving meant that even in winter or during crop failures, the family had ample food stored. Amish women had a long history or experience of canning foods, and the durability of canned goods allowed families to save food for longer, limiting external grocery costs during the Depression. For example, one Lancaster Amish family's records from 1935 show they canned everything from tomatoes and corn to jams, even making 40 quarts of sauerkraut and 25 quarts of pickles for their own use. By filling their pantries with home canned goods, Amish women insulated their households from shortages and high prices. Cooking hearty, budget-stretching meals, Amish women excelled at turning simple farm ingredients into filling meals for large families. They baked their own bread, often in outdoor brick ovens or wood stoves, and made dishes like stews, pot pies, cornmeal mush, and bean soup that could feed many mouths cheaply. Nothing was wasted. Yesterday's leftovers might become today's casserole. One government study noted an Amish family's sample menus included milk at every meal and home-churned butter on bread 3 times a day, showing how they relied on basic, home-produced foods. Amish cooks also made Pennsylvania Dutch specialties like chow chow, a pickled relish of mixed vegetables, and scrapple, a pork cornmeal loaf, which utilized odds and ends. These traditional recipes were designed to make do with whatever was on hand. By cooking from scratch and stretching ingredients, Amish women kept their families well-fed and healthy on a minimal cash grocery budget. Labor-intensive housekeeping, no modern appliances. Keeping an Amish home running in the 1930s required relentless labor, all of which fell to the women without aid of modern gadgets. Amish women cleaned their houses without vacuum cleaners or running water, scrubbed floors on hands and knees, and did laundry with old-fashioned wringer washers or washboards heated by wood or coal. Every Monday was typically wash day, involving heating big pots of water and washing load after load of clothes by hand, then line drying and ironing with heavy flat irons. This hard work saved the family from having to pay for laundry services or expensive appliances, which the Amish did not use. While arduous, the rigorous cleaning routine kept homes sanitary and families healthy. By dedicating countless hours to chores, Amish homemakers created a stable, clean environment that helped their families endure the Depression with dignity despite the lack of electricity or running water. Making soap and other necessities at home, resourceful Amish women often produced household essentials themselves rather than buying them. One example is soap making. Farm women rendered animal fat into lye soap for laundry and cleaning. Among Pennsylvania German farming people, homemade soap from old fat, water, and lye was common, a no-frill soap used for washing clothes, dishes, and even as basic bath soap. Amish women saved kitchen grease and meat drippings to later boil into soap, sometimes in big outdoor kettles. They also crafted items like candles from tallow, herbal salves for medicine, and simple home remedies such as chest rubs from goose grease. By making soap, cleaners, and remedies themselves, Amish households saved money and remained independent from store-bought goods. These domestic crafts passed down through generations, became especially important in the Depression when every penny counted. Organizing childcare and youth chores. With large families being the norm, Amish mothers managed childcare in a way that benefited the entire household economy. Amish children did not attend school past the 8th grade. High school was rejected, so teenage sons and daughters were at home and available to work. Mothers ensured that even younger children had age-appropriate chores. Girls might mind toddlers or peel potatoes, while boys collected firewood or fed animals. Older siblings helped raise the younger, which meant no need for hired nannies or babysitters. By their mid-teens, Amish youth were willing workers, integrated into the farm operation. As one Amish man recalled of his Depression-era family, having 2 boys just out of school and willing workers was a great help to take us through the Depression. This efficient use of family labor, coordinated by the mother's household supervision, meant all hands were contributing. Amish women thus sustained their families not just by their own work, but by instilling a strong work ethic in their children and overseeing their labor, multiplying the household's productivity when it was most needed. Strict household budgeting and thrift. Amish women acted as the day-to-day accountants of their households during the Depression. They carefully tracked what the family spent and made sure to squeeze value out of every dollar. According to one historical study, the wives of the house were typically in charge of recording and limiting consumption in the family during the Depression. An Amish farm wife would plan meals and purchases to avoid any waste and often kept a notebook of expenses. If milk sales or egg money came in, she allotted it to essential bills first. By enforcing frugality, using oil lamps only as needed, turning scraps into quilts, diluting soap to make it last, etc., Amish women kept their family finances under control. This budgeting was crucial at a time when cash income was very low. The women's vigilance ensured that what little money they had went to necessities, taxes, mortgage, salt, sugar, and that no funds were frittered away, cutting out luxuries and extraneous spending. Hand in hand with budgeting, Amish women rigorously eliminated non-essential spending during the 1930s. Treats and leisure purchases were largely abandoned. One Amish grandmother later remembered that during the Depression, they rarely splurged on goodies. Instead of buying candy, the family might enjoy homemade molasses cookies. Rather than store-bought toys, children played with homemade rag dolls or simple wooden toys crafted by family. Amish women also curtailed the use of the family car, if they had one at all, to save on gasoline, driving only when absolutely necessary. Clothes were patched instead of replaced, and any penny saved was a penny earned. This ultra-prudent mindset, deeply ingrained in Amish culture, meant that during the Depression, Amish households spent far less than the average American family. By denying themselves little indulgences, Amish women ensured the available money stretched to cover the things one truly couldn't produce at home. Refusing government relief or charity, Amish communities made a conscious decision to not accept public relief funds during the Depression, as accepting aid conflicted with their principles of self-reliance and community support. Amish women, alongside the men, bore the responsibility of surviving on their own without federal help. A 1939 news article noted with some astonishment that the Amish had religiously spurned state or federal relief, yet still managed to have comfortable livelihoods. This meant Amish families did not receive commodities or food stamps, so the women had to be that much more resourceful in feeding and caring for their households. By refusing outside aid, they also avoided the stigma or dependency that came with it. Amish women instead leaned into their own networks, like family or church, for help. Their pride in not taking a government handout went hand in hand with working even harder at home to make ends meet, proving their community could survive by its own means. Avoiding debt and foreclosure. Culturally, the Amish have long been wary of debt, and during the 1930s, this caution paid off. Amish families entered the Depression with relatively low debt loads. Many avoided mortgages or paid them down quickly in good years, so they were less vulnerable to bank foreclosure when farm incomes dropped. Amish women reinforced this by their thrift and savings, helping the family steer clear of new debts. If money did have to be borrowed, they preferred to borrow from within the community at little or no interest. Walter Cole Morgan's study of the Amish noted their practice of giving out interest-free or low-interest loans among church members. An Amish family in a pinch might quietly borrow a sum from a relative or the church deacon rather than a bank, thus avoiding high-interest payments. By not over-leveraging their farms and relying on community loans when necessary, many Amish were able to meet their interest and tax and hold on to their land. Consequently, farm foreclosures, which ravaged many American farming regions, were far less common in Amish settlements, maintaining small savings for emergencies. Despite hard times, Amish women tried to tuck away small savings whenever possible, creating a financial cushion. They canned food and made clothing to free up a bit of cash, some of which could be saved in an envelope or a local bank. Indeed, observers remark that Amish families still had money in the banks throughout the Depression thanks to their thrift. This was money earned through side sales, eggs, quilts, produce, or good prices in earlier years that they hadn't squandered. Such savings proved crucial for paying annual expenses like property taxes or an unexpected doctor's visit. For example, if a crop failure occurred or a medical emergency struck, an Amish wife might quietly fetch some of her saved egg money to pay the bill. Living expenses were kept so low that any extra income could become savings. And these emergency funds, however modest, gave Amish families a resilience that many other households lacked when the economy crashed, relying on mutual aid, community insurance. The Amish developed an informal but highly effective system of mutual aid that acted as their insurance and welfare safety net. Amish women and men contributed to this culture of mutual aid by helping neighbors in need and by sharing resources. If one family's barn burned down or a father became ill, the church district would ensure the family did not fail, supplying labor, food, or funds as needed. Cole Morgan's 1942 report highlighted this program of brotherly love and mutual aid in Amish communities. For financial needs, rather than turn to government relief or commercial loans, Amish would take up collections at church or extend no-interest loans to each other. Amish women participated by cooking meals for afflicted neighbors, donating produce or clothing to those worse off, and organizing benefit events like bake sales quietly within the community. This strong mutual aid network meant that an Amish housewife knew if her family hit a crisis, her community would rally around, and she in turn would do the same for others. It replaced many functions of public welfare and kept families afloat during the worst of times. Selling eggs, butter, and other egg money goods. Amish women generated important income through small-scale sales of farm products they produced, often referred to as egg money, though it included more than eggs. They would sell excess eggs, homemade butter, cream, or cheese to local grocers or neighbors. According to one account, farm wives were usually in charge of the chickens, and the money received from selling the eggs was hers. This trickle of cash, coming weekly from egg sales, frequently kept the family going when crop income was low. One historian noted that egg money kept the family from starving when times were tough. Amish women also sold home-churned butter in crocks or prints and might take a couple of dressed chickens to market on Saturdays. These efforts turned their domestic skills into vital cash. Even if the amounts were small per week, over the year, they added up and often made the difference in paying the bills. Marketing garden produce and baked goods. Besides eggs and dairy, Amish women found other outlets to turn their labor into income or trade. Many maintained more garden produce than the family could eat and sold the surplus. They took vegetables, fruits, or canned goods to nearby farmers markets or roadside stands, selling tomatoes by the bushel, berries, or homemade jams to English or non-Amish customers. Historical reports from Lancaster County note that produce sales were among the most efficient forms of income for plain sect farms during the Depression, alongside dairy and poultry. Amish women might also sell baked goods like bread, pies, or donuts. In some communities, Amish ladies became known for their shoe-fly pies or cinnamon rolls, which they'd bake early in the morning to sell in town. Such home industries provided a few dollars here and there that could be used to buy fabric, medicine, or to save for emergency needs. By monetizing their gardening and cooking skills, Amish women infused a little extra cash into the family economy exactly when it was needed. Launching small family businesses. In certain cases, Amish families started small side businesses to weather the Depression, and women were key contributors to these enterprises. For example, an Amish family in Lancaster ran a small butcher shop in town as a supplement to their dairy farm. The father and sons did the slaughtering, but the mother and daughters likely helped with making sausage, rendering lard, and minding the store. They sold poultry, pork, and beef products to town customers, which brought in much-needed cash during hard times. Other families might have opened roadside produce stands or took in sewing and quilting commissions from outside buyers. Some Amish women earned a little money by quilting comforters for non-Amish clients or by hiring out as seamstresses. A few even worked as household help for neighboring families, though this was less common among old orders. These entrepreneurial efforts, always done in ways consistent with Amish values, such as within family, not requiring modern technology, diversified the family's income. The extra few $100s from a side business could be what saved the farm. Amish women's labor and management in these ventures, like keeping the shop, dealing with customers, etc., were indispensable for their success, drawing strength from faith and positivity. Amish women leaned strongly on their religious faith to get through the difficulties of the Depression. They taught their families to trust in God's providence and to be thankful for what they did have. This spiritual outlook fostered hope and emotional resilience. Many Amish later reflected that they hadn't felt as despairing as others did in the 1930s. For instance, Jonathan Zook of Lancaster wrote that, as far as the Depression was concerned, we as a family never felt the hardship that many did. He credited having willing family workers and never lacking food. Such reflections underline a common sentiment in Amish memoirs. They believed it could have been worse. Amish women, as the keepers of the home and the faith, played a huge role in maintaining this morale. They continued holding evening prayers, singing hymns, and encouraging their children with Bible verses about hard work and contentment. This steady spiritual support helped shield their families from panic and despair. It gave them mental fortitude to persevere and find joy in simple things, even when money was very scarce. Relying on family and community networks, the Amish social structure provided an invaluable safety net during the Depression. Nuclear families did not operate in isolation. Often, several generations or extended relatives lived on the same farm or nearby. It was common that both parents, all children, and often extended family worked on the farm together. Grandparents, aunts, and uncles would help out as needed, sharing resources and labor. Amish women could call on a sister or cousin to assist with a big canning project, or send children to a grandparent's house to be looked after if she had to help in the fields. This extended family cooperation meant that an Amish household always had a support system to fall back on. Furthermore, within each church district, around 20 to 40 families, there was a tight bond. Everyone knew everyone and would step up in times of trouble. If an Amish woman fell ill, neighbor women would bring over meals and do her laundry. One way Amish women sustained their families was by never hesitating to both give and accept help from their community network, creating a robust web of mutual support. Participating in communal work frolics. Amish women amplified their productivity by doing certain tasks collectively in organized gatherings known as frolics or bees. For example, a quilting bee might be hosted at one home, where a group of women would assemble to finish quilting a large quilt together. In the same vein, there were canning frolics. A group might gather to can a bumper crop of tomatoes, divvying up the results, and apple butter frolics, taking a day to boil down apples into butter collectively. By pooling labor and know-how, the work was faster and everyone benefited. These events also allowed families who had less produce or resources to share in the abundance of those who had more, an informal way of redistributing goods. If one farmer's orchard had a great yield of apples, several Amish housewives would come help make apple butter, and each would take some home. Such cooperative labor ensured that no surplus went to waste and no family went without, a critical advantage in Depression years. Amish women, through their fellowship and teamwork, turned potentially overwhelming tasks into efficient, even joyful community projects that sustained all. Barn raisings and shared labor projects. The famous Amish barn raising is a classic example of community solidarity that was alive and well in the 1930s. When a barn burnt down or a new one was needed, the entire community, men and women, would come together to build it in a day. Dozens of men worked on construction, while women provided support by cooking vast amounts of food to feed the crew and tending to children. This spirit of shared labor went beyond barns. Amish neighbors joined forces for harvesting each other's fields, thrashing wheat, or butchering hogs. An Amish housewife would prepare meals for 20 men, helping bring in her family's crop, and later in the week, those men's wives would feed her husband and sons during their barn raising. Such reciprocal labor exchange meant families didn't have to hire outside help. It's noted that Amish mutual aid included not just funds, but non-monetary aid, care, and general support for the needy. Much of this non-monetary aid was literally labor. By contributing her cooking, cleaning, and organizing skills to these community work efforts, an Amish woman saved her own family the expense of paid labor and cemented relationships that guaranteed help when she needed it in return. Sharing surplus and caring for the needy. Generosity within the community was another way Amish families made it through together. Amish women were quick to share any surplus with neighbors who had less. If one family's garden had a bumper crop of beans, the mother might can extra and quietly deliver a case of jars to a family whose garden had failed. Churches informally identified those in need, like widows, the sick, large families with crop losses, and women would coordinate donations of food and clothing. During the Depression, this charitable sharing was essential. It ensured no one in the community went hungry or unclothed if others could help it. Walter Cole Morgan observed that the Amish had a tradition of an informal welfare system, essentially a communal process of sharing financial resources and goods. Amish women took pride in feeding not just their own children, but also lending a hand to others. For example, an Amish diary from the 1930s might note baking extra bread on Saturdays specifically to give to a neighbor family. These acts of brotherly love were done humbly and often anonymously, but they sustained the overall community. In hard times, such intra-community charity meant that an Amish family could depend on collective support instead of facing hardship alone. Passing down traditional knowledge. Amish women in the 1930s relied on skills and knowledge that had been honed over generations, and they actively passed these on to their daughters. The Amish had endured hardships before, even persecution and migration in earlier centuries, developing a culture of practical knowledge about farming and household management. Mothers taught their girls from a young age how to garden, can, sew, quilt, cook, and care for livestock, ensuring the next generation could carry on these sustaining practices. These time-tested methods, many going back to Europe in the 1700s, laid the groundwork for farmers' survival during the Great Depression. For example, a young Amish girl in the 1930s might learn from her grandmother how to pickle eggs or store cabbages in a root cellar. Wisdom that isn't found in textbooks but was crucial for stretching food supplies. By preserving this collective knowledge and continually training their children, Amish women created resilient households. Even if 1930s challenges were new, the solutions often came from old traditions. The continuity of these practices from mother to daughter meant Amish families didn't have to reinvent the wheel under duress. They already had a rich toolkit of heritage skills to deploy in the Depression, keeping social life simple and low cost. Amish social life, by doctrine, avoided worldly entertainments, and this ironically became an advantage in the Depression. Since they already did not attend movies, concerts, or other costly amusements, Amish families didn't feel as acutely the loss of such luxuries. They never depended on them. Instead, Amish women fostered free or frugal forms of recreation, hymn sings, visiting relatives, or hosting simple Sunday dinners. Every other Sunday, the Amish gathered for church in someone's home or barn, followed by a big potluck meal, a joyful community event that cost little beyond what each family contributed. On non-church Sundays, families would take turns visiting each other. An Amish mother might prepare a batch of homemade ice cream or popcorn for an evening with neighbors instead of spending money on entertainment. Children played outdoor games or enjoyed winter sledding parties organized by the community. These wholesome activities kept morale high. Importantly, Amish women's work made such fellowship possible, like cooking dishes to share, keeping the home presentable for visitors, etc. Without radios or cars, which they generally forewent, Amish families made their own fun. This not only saved money, it also kept the community tightly knit, providing emotional support. The Depression might have been socially isolating for some Americans, but Amish women ensured that social bonds and cheerful gatherings in their community continued strong at virtually no cost, emphasizing self-reliance as a value. Culturally, Amish women reinforced an ethos of self-reliance and hard work in their families, which paid dividends in hard times. They instilled pride in making do without outside help. Government researchers at the time noted the Amish high degree of self-sufficiency compared to other rural people. This self-sufficiency wasn't just economic, but psychological. Amish homemakers believed it was their duty to provide for themselves. For example, rather than complain about hardships, an Amish woman might frame frugal living as virtuous and industrious, not something to be pitied. By upholding this attitude, Amish families were mentally prepared to tighten belts and work harder when the Depression hit. A federal study in 1942 concluded that Amish community stability owed much to their rejection of modern dependency and their commitment to a labor-intensive, self-reliant way of life. In practice, this meant Amish women continued to bake their own bread, make their own clothes, and can their own food even when convenience products existed elsewhere, because that was their normal way. That commitment to doing for themselves, rooted in both faith and tradition, gave them a built-in resilience that helped them ride out the economic storm better than most. Trust-based community credit. The Amish developed their own informal financial system grounded in trust, which Amish women participated in and benefited from. Instead of bank loans, families in need could borrow money from fellow church members. These loans often carried no or very low interest, as they were acts of brotherhood rather than profit. Cole Morgan observed that by eschewing investments outside of the community and loaning available money at low interest rates to members of the church, the Amish created a rural credit system enjoyed by a few farmers elsewhere. In practical terms, this meant if an Amish couple needed $200 to buy a cow or to get through a bad year, an older member with savings might lend it to them informally. Amish women were sometimes the facilitators of these loans, quietly mentioning a need to the deacon or within the sewing circle and finding someone who could help. The trust and discretion in these dealings were absolute. Everyone repaid as they were able. Because of this communal credit, Amish families avoided ruinous interest payments and could stabilize their finances more easily. The community essentially acted as its own bank and insurance. Amish women supported this by contributing their savings to the pool and by abiding by the ethic of mutual trust. For instance, never shaming someone who needed help and never flaunting if one was prosperous. This low-cost credit network was a backbone of Amish economic survival, farming with low-cost methods with no tractors or electricity. The Amish commitment to traditional farming methods ended up being economically advantageous in the 1930s. While many farmers had gone into debt to buy tractors, combines, and electric pumps in the 1920s, the Amish did not. They continued to farm with horses and manpower, avoiding those big expenses. A 1940 observer noted Amish farms operated without the benefit of tractors, relying instead on the power of horses and mules. During the Depression, fuel was expensive and many tractors sat idle for lack of money to run them. But Amish horse teams kept plowing at no extra cost. The horses fed on farm-grown feed. Amish women supported this low-tech approach by doing things like milking by hand, since they had no electric milking machines, and using kerosene or wood for cooking and lighting rather than electric appliances. They also did without tractors' time savings, meaning longer days working, something Amish wives were willing to endure to save money. The Amish also avoided buying commercial fertilizers or pesticides, instead relying on crop rotation and manure, which saved cash and preserved soil. Government experts during the New Deal, looking for solutions, were intrigued that Amish farms, though outmoded, were surviving because they weren't burdened by large operating costs. In short, Amish women and their families doubled down on efficient horse-powered farming and home production, proving that a frugal, labor-intensive model could outlast the capital-intensive model when markets crashed. Providing home health care and midwifery. In Amish communities, medical care was often kept in-house, reducing expenses that could cripple a family budget. Amish women used home remedies for common illnesses, teas for colds, poultices for infections, rest and nourishment for recovery. Instead of rushing to doctors for every ailment, they were skilled in nursing sick children through fevers and tending to injuries with minimal outside intervention. Likewise, childbirth was typically handled at home. Amish midwives, or experienced older women, assisted in deliveries, and most Amish babies in the 1930s were born in the family home, not in a hospital. This meant families did not incur hospital bills, which for others during the Depression could be financially devastating. When professional medical care was absolutely needed, the community sometimes pooled funds to help cover it, with another facet of mutual aid. By and large, though, Amish mothers managed health care within the family. They kept kitchens clean to prevent disease, quarantined those with contagious illnesses, and relied on faith, specifically anointing and prayer, along with folk medicine. This self-sufficiency in health matters saved money and also kept the family from the uncertainty of relying on outside charity for medical crises. Amish women's role as family nurse and midwife was thus a critical, if less visible, way they sustained their households through tough times. Exchanging knowledge through Amish publications. Even without modern media, Amish women stayed informed and shared tips via community newspapers and letters. The Amish-friendly weekly budget newspaper published letters from Amish and Mennonite correspondents across the country. Through these letters, women could learn about each other's experiences and solutions. For instance, Amish farm wives wrote in with reports of their harvest yields, recipes, and frugality tips. In September 1936, letters from Lancaster County Amish women like Fanny Byler and Mrs. John K. Lapp appeared in the budget describing local crop conditions, a bumper potato crop that year, and how they were managing the excess by drying and storing potatoes. Such shared knowledge helped spread successful practices. One woman's method of canning corn might travel to dozens of households via word of mouth or letters. There were also Amish and Mennonite almanacs and booklets that featured home economic advice during the Depression. By reading and contributing to these publications, Amish women across different settlements could support each other. They effectively crowdsourced solutions to Depression challenges, whether it was a new canning technique or simply moral support in print. This flow of information strengthened their ability to cope, as each family wasn't problem-solving entirely alone. It's an early example of a peer network, facilitated in a low-tech way by Amish women's communication links, upholding stable, nurturing home lives. Ultimately, the cumulative impact of Amish women's efforts was a level of stability that drew national attention. By the end of the 1930s, government researchers concluded that the old order Amish communities were extraordinarily intact compared to others. In fact, the U.S. Bureau of Agricultural Economics rated the Amish of Lancaster County as the most economically and culturally stable agricultural community in the nation. This stability was directly tied to Amish women's unwavering hard work and management of home and farm during the Depression. They kept their families fed, clothed, healthy, and hopeful, thus preventing the kinds of domestic crises, malnutrition, family breakups, despair, that plagued many American homes in that era. The Amish family farm system, powered by the labor of both men and women, emerged as a success story. As historians Catherine Jellison and Stephen Reshley note, Amish women's production and conservation activities gave their families a level of economic security that few other farm households achieved in the 1930s. By preserving their way of life and guiding their families through hardship, Amish women helped their entire community come out of the Depression relatively unscathed. Their legacy from that era is a testament to the power of thrift, skill, faith, and community in sustaining family welfare against all odds. For more contents like this, click here to subscribe